in the chat. Okay. Great. Welcome to this talking space, everyone. And thanks for joining us on what is a already very hot day and going to get even hotter. What we wanted to do, this was a talking space that we added in because colleagues were finding that they were coming into quite a lot of conversations around levelling up, and also conversations about the kind of future for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire around a combined authority. So we thought we'd just have a discussion around what the opportunities might be for movement and physical activity. And really, it's the start of a conversation going on in future years about how we make the most of those opportunities that are arising. So thanks very much for joining us. Just before we start, a few housekeeping items. We are going to try and play a video in a while. Technology always seems to fail us, so we'll see how that goes. But if you can make sure your microphones are turned off, that will be helpful, unless you're contributing. If you use the chat function or the hand raise function, if you want to make a comment, disagree with something, ask a question, that would be great. And my colleague Adam is going to keep an eye on that. And please do fill the chat function with your comments. That will be really helpful. It would be nice to see faces, even if they're perspiring and you're eating your lunch. But we've always thought that this is very much an informal space in between a busy morning and a busy afternoon. So if you want to turn your camera off, then that's absolutely fine. Just go with that. And as I mentioned, we're recording the session. We are planning on finishing at 1:30. I was worried that we weren't going to fill the time because our public health colleagues who were joining us, ironically, have got COVID and food poisoning. So, but now I'm thinking that we may well end up going overtime. So I will try and stick to 1:30. But if we need to, we can keep the conversation going. So what we aim to do is to provide some scene setting for levelling up and then move it towards a more local perspective. In a moment, Martin Allison's going to give his perspective, and then I've got a recorded interview with Derek Higton from Nottinghamshire County Council, who is also chair of Active Partners Trust, which is the overarching body for Active Notts and Active Derbyshire. And then we've got some local contributions and hopefully an opportunity for other people to come into the conversation. So starting with Martin, hopefully a lot of people will know Martin. He's from Leicester, so he's got a really good understanding of the East Midlands, and he's a national advisor on culture and sport. He contributes to many national platforms and think tanks and supports the professional development of both our current and our future leaders within the public sector. He did join us last year with John Oxley for a conversation around recovery and reinvent, particularly talking about the leisure centre sector in terms of, I suppose to be controversial slightly, the leisure centre sector over the last 20 years supporting affluent people to retain being active as opposed to really focusing on inequality. And that started a conversation for Active Partners Trust and partners around how we can develop a leadership programme to try and help the sector move towards more focus on inequality, and you'll hear about that more in the coming months. Very recently, he's published a paper on his thoughts following the National Audit Office report about the impact of public sector investment on sport and physical activity on the last 10 years. So it's great that this is probably one of the first opportunities in public. Outside of that paper, Martin, you might have been able to discuss that. His views may be seen by some as being controversial, but I think by most they're thought to be thought-provoking and moving the conversation on. And I think he's very perceptive in predicting and influencing the direction of travel for the physical activity sector regarding public policy. So hopefully that's accurate, Martin. And, you know, we can just have the next 10 minutes, just have a conversation around your views on levelling up.
Yeah, you're very kind. I suppose what I'd like to do in the 10 minutes is sort of headline 3 theories of thoughts, mixture of questions, observations. The first is my view of levelling up as defined in the legislation, and what is it all about? And I suppose my question there is, what is levelling up in terms of that piece of legislation? My second question is, how does that relate to Michael Marmot's work around health inequalities? And then my third question is the one you've already referred to, Stuart, which is where does the sector sit in terms of its own track record of levelling up? And maybe that's where the controversy might kick in. So if I just introduce those 3 themes quite quickly. Levelling up, I'm fast becoming an old cynic, but I'm quite happy to describe the whole levelling up agenda as defined in the legislation as not much more than political rhetoric designed to win and retain red wall seats. Maybe those areas are legitimately feeling left behind, and we have to acknowledge and accept that. But the legislation is rich in evidence. I mean, the evidence is strong, it's well presented, it's well set out, it's historic, it's real. And yet the solutions that emerge in it, I become quite cynical about. So far, we've seen a lot of funding come direct out of central government under almost ministerial dictate, which appears to be missing out local government completely, when local government has had for years a mechanism of being allocated resourcing that's dictated by demand and need. And whilst nobody is ever happy with what they get, there is at least a transparent structure there. I'm not sure the same structure there is what we're seeing in terms of where funding is going and how it's going. And then the second bit, which I know you want to talk about, is the linking almost cynically of, if you want the powers and you want the money, you've got to restructure local government. And you've got to introduce elected mayors. Is that the death knell completely now of 2-tier working in local government, particularly in counties? What does that actually mean? It's a strange way of reorganising local government, in my opinion. The most vociferous of commentators would say, in reality, it's no more than political gerrymandering, and there's nothing there about addressing the long-term structural change needed to address inequality. So I'd like to be impressed by somebody that is the answer to the problem. So then my second question, how does this relate to Michael Marmot? Remember, Marmot produced his first report over a decade ago when he identified the whole issue of health inequality being at the heart of the problems we face as a country. And he called for systematic change across a whole series of social and economic determinants, which he said was resulting in the poorest communities literally dying earlier than the richer communities, and those communities living with disabling illness for far longer than the richer communities. And he produced the graph that showed the concept of that inequality. He said we had to address early years development, education, housing, worklessness, low income, environmental quality, not just access to health services. He was quite critical of short-term funding, where we just put chunks of money into the poorest communities, pull it out 5 years later, nothing has changed but at best, something's changed and we've just moved the same problem to the next poorest community along the road. And he called for what he called proportionate universalism. And in simple terms, he said, we need to address the whole system. We need to improve everybody's health by tackling all those social and economic determinants, but we need to do more in those communities where need is the greatest. And he talked about changing that graph, reducing the steepness of it and closing the gap between the poorest and the richest. In effect, let's level up. That's what he does with that graph. So that's my second point. What's the difference? My third point is the track record of this sector in terms of addressing levelling up. You know, you've referred, Stuart, to the debate I had with John Oxley that was on the back of a lot of writing I was doing when I said participation in sport and leisure, as we were talking about them, had literally not changed in the 40 odd years of my career. The problems were the same now as I entered 40 years ago when sports development was first created. And then I'd done a piece of work that you referred to where I collected a lot of data, particularly around sport and leisure centres, but not just sport and leisure centres, which actually, when you set it against the Marmot graph, showed that most of our usage was not in the poorest communities. It was coming from not necessarily the richest communities, but certainly the richer communities. We were actually making the richer fitter and healthier. And therefore, my argument was actually what we've been doing, particularly in the leisure centre sector, is actually making health inequalities worse, not better. And yes, I wrote recently, I've been quite quiet over the summer, but the National Audit Office report really stimulated me to do that. They looked at the performance of the DCMS and Sport England over the last decade and comes out with some pretty stark messages that the sector really needs to grasp. One, the Olympics did not increase participation. In fact, it had gone backwards 3 years after the Olympics. That led the government to change tack and move to addressing inequalities in activity, not participation. And between 2016 and 2019, the period of that piece of policy, there was no increase in activity levels among adults, and the so-called priority groups where inactivity was the lowest, there were the marginal changes at best. And they're really coming to the conclusion that that policy in the run-up to the pandemic was really not working. And whilst they're quite complimentary about the shifts in the new strategy, I think they're posing the question, if the system is unable to change in the last decade, why will it change now? And therefore, to link those three things together, we've got a pretty poor record of levelling up. How can we possibly contribute to an agenda that probably is not as clear and as well defined as we would want it to be anyway? There you go.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Martin. We've got a few moments if anyone wants to come back with any questions to Martin around that and thoughts. I mean, in terms of giving us an overview of your thinking in terms of nationally, then that's really helpful. And I do remember it's virtually 10 years ago to the day where I was at probably one of the events at the London Olympics and considered that the Olympics was a highlight of my kind of career in local authority leisure. And how do we? This is a great platform for really focusing on getting people active. And the disappointment that I've felt and seen over the last 10 years since then is very disappointing. I think can see a move towards an understanding, particularly in recent years, around the importance of the active environment in people being out and moving, and less reliance on sport and recreation. But
sorry, Stuart.
How
the sector might move. A comment from Rachel North.
Okay, Rachel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I agree with everything Martin has said, and I think if we expect, there's some realities about how the country is organised, how our public services are organised that we can't change, and we are what's called a unitary state, i.e. all the power is at central government level, and we are allowed to do things at local level because government gives us the powers or duties to do them. And you look at European international comparisons, states that have much more devolution of power to local areas to make decisions, spend money how they want to, all of that are much better placed to deal with some of these agendas. That is a reality. And that's got worse in the last 12 years rather than better, even with devolution. So I mean, absolutely, I think there's some real problems in how our system is organised that make it really, really difficult. And it is very depressing. I often think, Martin, when you get to an age, you've been around a long time, been around 32 years, you feel it's part of the age thing. And I feel sorry for our younger colleagues who are trying to make things work. So in a positive way, I would say, despite all of that, and that is the reality, and I've seen Michael Marmot speak recently, he's very angry, and rightly so. There are some horrendous, realisms about how people are treated in this country and the impact on their health and their long-term activities. It's appalling. So what we can do is to do things locally. So what can we do locally? And what we try and do within a Derby context is let's join up everything we can at a local level. Let's understand, and it's easier if you like around a city council because it's broad, it's easier geography, but let's join up everything we can do that recognises things are connected. So the outcomes around health are connected to how people can move around, how they are physically supported, whether activities they can take part in, are the parks clean and safe, and a whole range of other things. And let's really try and do that together in the best way we can, despite some of that national reality. And then, and all of the stuff around local power, all of that stuff, absolutely. And then the combined authority, just to reference that, again, it's a national government, agenda about devolution has to be in this way and all the rest of it has to be a combined, a mayor, etc. But it is about giving power and money to the local area. It doesn't change the structure of government. It doesn't require you to have unitary councils. You can have any councils you like, but you have a combined authority. You could argue it's a different tier of government. That's a different debate. But it is a tier that has power and money and flexibility that you haven't got at the moment. So the West Midlands has additional funding, additional powers to do things for the West Midlands that we don't have in the East Midlands. So creating a combined authority, you get access to that. And we're at the moment in a conversation with government, again, a bonkers process, have to negotiate with government about it, but that is what it is, about what is our money, what's going to be our annual amount of money that comes down to the East Midlands every year for the next 30 years. And 75% of that money is revenue and 25% of that money is capital. So it gives you some flexibility. And that number is anywhere between 37 million pounds a year, every year for 30 years. So not insubstantial, so helpful. And that would be money, new money, not existing money repackaged, but new money that could be spent at the, what is the Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Nottingham City, Derby City, the D2N2 footprint locally. So if that priority can be understood by those partners, and the partners in what would be this combined authority would be Derby City, Nottinghamshire County Council and Derbyshire County Council, so the 4 upper tier councils would be on the cabinet of that combined authority, there's a chance they'll use some of that money for this agenda if it's understood effectively. So there is something, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but if we can get more control locally, if we can do more stuff that D2N2 footprint, but also at a local level by joining up our systems and our thinking and not seeing leisure and movement as being a separate thing to health and housing and transport, that would be a really positive thing. I just made those comments, but I agree with Martin. I feel very similar most of the time, Martin.
Yeah, and my retort to that is absolutely you've got to use whatever opportunities you have, and it is an opportunity. I think some of my questions around what you've said is the cabinet, as you've said, is made up of those cities. So much of the leisure infrastructure rests at a district council level. A lot of the leisure centre contracts are let by district councils, not the city councils. A lot of the parks and playing fields are controlled at that level, and I've just got that concern that we get squeezed out in the more strategic debates.
Definitely a risk. Definitely a risk.
Okay, I think we just touched on the combined authority proposal for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire that was going to be picked up in the recording that we've made. But I think it might be worth just, rather than playing that recording now and going over 15 minutes of going over some of the things we've talked about, what we'll do is we'll put that on the website. So that's Derek Higton. So Derek's the Service Director for Communities in Place in Nottinghamshire County Council, but he's also chair of Active Partners Trust Board. So he's got a kind of consideration that from his professional point of view, but also from being Active Partners Trust and how it making our move could be affected as a plan by the opportunities that might arise. So we won't play that now because it will take up a lot of our discussion time, but I'll just pick up on a few things that came through in his interview that we did that maybe we can then feed off with some local examples. So just in terms of that levelling up opportunity, we discussed quite a lot about that capital investment that Martin touched on. So Towns Fund, levelling up funds, and the opportunity that some local authority districts and boroughs have taken in redeveloping some of their, or renovating some of their high streets and their cultural buildings and others, in terms of trying to bring them back to really important pieces of the town centre. And I guess from a movement perspective, the important thing for us is how do we make sure that those urban environments are walkable, so that people choose to walk into their town centres rather than using their car for relatively short journeys, and how we can contribute to the thinking within town planners and economic regeneration people to make sure that's the case. And I think we've got a couple of examples, and I'll ask people in a while just to pick up on that. I think High Peak Council have done some of that, North East are looking at it. But then the other aspect is, and I think this is emerging, it's the importance of those spaces that are in between the buildings and how those spaces can be used to bring people together, but also that they are greened up as much as possible in terms of people being able to connect with nature. And I don't know, Rachel, could I ask you just to mention about the urban forest development in the City Council in terms of that project that's in front of the assembly rooms?
Okay, cool, Stuart. Yeah, and so I think there are 4 of them, pop-up forests across the country, and one of our team in our grounds maintenance team, who works very closely with voluntary organisations in the city, saw it on, I think it's on YouTube. That was a really good idea and brought it forward as an idea. So it came through that way. It came from a very junior member of staff just having an idea into the partnership space. What it is a pop-up forest. So it's a forest sort of transplanted into the marketplace in Derby. It's there for 6 weeks. Don't ask me about technical questions about how the trees are supported, but they are basically supported in pots, and that, it keeps them, effectively healthy for that period of time. They will then be transplanted into the parks and, put properly into the earth, and they are long-term, sustainable. But it is an attempt to try and show what greening up your city can look like in very quick terms, and give people a place to come and just see the benefits of having nature around you. We've got picnic benches within it and some cabins around it. People are using it to sit down, have lunch and talk and just all of that. And when I went to when we opened it on a Saturday, and we saw songbirds singing in the marketplace, and everyone was absolutely sure they'd never seen them before in the marketplace quite that way. So who knows if that's true or not? Sounds a bit magic, doesn't it? But it does feel like a place with, it feels very different. It's highlighting the benefits of nature for the city, creating a space for people to get together and do things, part of our generation more generally, and raising profile. And we are looking as part of our overall city ambition document about how do we bring nature into the city more, and not necessarily formally but informally. And we're working with the Down to Earth project, which is a project Derby based, and they're working with the Eden project in Cornwall about how do you bring nature-led regeneration back into city centres, you know, small scale, large scale, medium scale, whatever. Just how do you make it a greener place? And the large scale stuff would be, how do we possibly break the dominance of the ring road? How do we stop the ring road and the domination of the car taking over the city? And how do we reduce its impact? And whether that's bringing down the number of lanes, creating more green canopies, just changing the way it feels, creating much more permeable accesses across it, that sort of thing, down to the small scale, like the forest, doing some pop-up, you know, nature in some of this tiny spaces of public realm that there might be, putting pots in there, putting greenery in there, putting greenery onto our lamppost, just trying to create much more interest around nature. But all the ideas are sort of up for grabs, if you like, and we work with Down to Earth as a local grassroots organisation about bringing forward ideas they've got, rather than us having ideas from the council's point of view. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great, Rachel. And I just wanted that example to illustrate really how we can start to think about that redevelopment of the town and city centres that makes it attractive for people to walk through. And then obviously we get the reduction in short journeys by car, and hopefully improvements in air quality. And I'll just make a little comment there. There was an article in The Guardian last week around the increasing evidence that air quality is affecting human cells, so they burn calories less. So the emerging evidence is that obesity is very much linked to air quality. So not only should we be improving air quality from reducing carbon emissions, but also from that impact on obesity as well. So it's that evidence is emerging, and I would recommend anyone to try and find that article. So the regeneration aspect is really important. I'm just wondering if either Rob Wilkes or Chris Mills are on the call and could just talk about how the levelling up funding has been used from a leisure perspective, but actually trying to produce facilities that do break that mould of just being sports facilities for people who are active.
Yeah, Stuart, Chris Mills here at North East. I think I've just done based on your email earlier, just a bit of an update on where we are and what funds we're tapping into. I mean, we're putting a £20 million bid in for levelling up for Eckington Town Centre project and Lansbury Park. That's largely around redevelopment opportunities, new public realm, additional parking is in that. But a new activity hub as well. That's consisting large play area, cafe, toilet, skate park, 3G pitches, nature areas, dog agility areas, and so on. Improvement to grass pitches. But you know, we're looking to get that bid in by 2nd of August. But when we talk about, and I agree with what's been said here, we do feel like we've gone around in circles for years now to some degree. But one of our big projects we're working on at the moment at Charlie Park, it's a £25 million refurbishment to that site. Well, it's a new build, and we're working in partnership with a number of partners, the town's board being one of them, who are contributing 7 million towards Charlie, which actually will be called Claycross Active when it opens in 2025. We're looking at opening that, but it's largely been about a lot more than just leisure facilities and gyms and pools and everything else. It's been about co-locating services. So we've got Citizens Advice coming into that site. We've got Chesterfield Royal Hospital also having an area within that facility. And we have got your standard swimming pools, your fitness suites, but we knew that we'd got high levels of antisocial behaviour in Claycross, and from listening to residents from surveys, consultations we've done in years gone by, we knew that we had to do more in terms of outdoor activity and actually internal activity as well. So we've gone down the route, moving away from your traditional leisure centres to including things like Tag Active, which is the interactive gaming for younger people, for teenagers in particular, and soft play areas. So just sort of broadening our understanding and knowledge, moving away. We didn't want to open a facility exactly the same as what we opened in 1972. It were about moving forward and creating something differently. But also we'd got an opportunity where there were a lot of green space up at Charlie Park externally. And how did we link that with the town and the town regeneration and the facility? And we're very keen on linking up walking networks, cycling networks, including a measured mile. We've just put in a new disc golf facility. We're working really closely with the Football Foundation, and they wanting to put a multi-purpose gaming area up there. So there's that free offer as well as that, you know, that obviously majority of people who come into the facility, there'll be a charge. So we're trying to balance off quite a lot of external free activity, fun type sessions, along with other things that we're introducing up in Claycross around Love Exploring apps. We're trying to be a little bit more innovative in terms of our offer and so forth. So lots of things happening for us linked to this, and as I say, the towns deal, that Claycross will be seeing many changes over the coming years. I think there's 10 key projects on that. But in terms of shared prosperity, we're putting in a bid of 2.6 million. That's got to be submitted, I think, by 1st of August. The focus on that, this is across the district, is around public realm again and parks. So we're very keen on, absolutely agree with everything what's been said. We know what we do within leisure facilities. We're expecting our leisure facilities to bring in 1.1 million visits a year when Charlie has been built and is done, finalised. So they play a massive part, but it's what we can do externally in terms of play. And we're looking to invest out at Shared Prosperity, 600,000 identified for local parks for both parish and district, supported with some match funding through Section 106. So we understand it's not just about going to a gym, it's not just about going to a pool, it's about play is as good as anything in terms of engaging with them younger people and getting them physically active as well. Also, as part of the Shared Prosperity, we're looking at another 30k, or we've identified 30k to probably go towards county to update and improve walking networks, things like signage, gates for people with disabilities and so forth. So I think a lot of our thinking has been around that green space, that external, that outdoor offer, getting people physically active in a different way, really. Is that all right?
Oh, Chris, thanks very much. I think that gives us a real perspective from a district council point of view about trying to operate outside of that silo of just the leisure centre provision, but actually how all the various parts of the council are coming together, planning, potentially housing in their parks, along with the voluntary and community sector, and some of the upper tier facilities like libraries and other things come together to actually create a place, and how that hub that's created, that physical building, but then links with the ways that people get into the town centre and hopefully leave their car and they walk instead. Yeah. So that's a really great illustration. I'm just wondering if there's Rob Wilkes from High Peak is around to talk about Gloucester.
I'm here, Stuart. Yeah.
Great.
I can chip in. I suppose it's interesting to hear all of the conversation really, and listening to what people said. I can take, a number of different thoughts out of that and things that we've been thinking about ourselves as well. I suppose to summarise where we are at the moment in High Peak from a sort of leisure, parks, recreation perspective, it's a learning journey. I think accepting the starting point is that we haven't got it right, and the years past there hasn't been a fundamental change to inequalities improving in some of those poor areas. There hasn't been a improvement to the way that we work together as organisations necessarily, and that includes internal colleagues across a range of different services. How do we come together better to try and shape a better future? And I think what we've started with is accepting that, and then trying to work out how we can collaborate better, how we can get more of a shared vision for what the future might look like, and trying to build as much resident voice and engagement with communities into that journey as we can, so that what we are doing is trying to design things that are reflective of the local need a lot more than they were before. We're not saying we've got it right or wrong. It's different, it feels different, and it's created some really awkward moments and conversations, really, and questioning whether we're doing the right thing or whether we're not. And I think learning to accept that that's actually okay and that's a strength is something that is really hard to get our heads around. We're at the process now where we're collaborating around a new movement strategy, and what we're trying to do there is take a widest possible view on physical activity, movement, and how that should integrate into everyday life for everyone, and then how that sort of translates to some of our services and those services provided by others as well. And that's the starting point for greater collaboration. And then some of those investments, that Chris touched on that happen in North East are investments that we're hoping to make in the High Peak too. I think the challenges around that is where the system starts to get in the way. So the Levelling Up Fund is a perfect example where we too are bidding for some resource around leisure assets, but having a certain very short amount of time to work it up doesn't align with true collaboration, and they're almost expecting shovel-ready projects to come forward and just be delivered. So therefore that turns it back on its head, and they're very much against the approach that we're trying to take. So how do you, the real thing to grapple with in my mind is, how do you work with a new approach that's very much about learning and evolution versus the system saying you have to do it this way? And how do you actually make something that comes out of it fit for purpose and truly reflective of what's needed? And I think the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a very similar set of circumstances. Extremely tight deadline, funding. Yes, you've got more control because it's you've got an allocation to spend. So, but again, the challenges around the short-term nature of it all. So, how does that encourage true collaboration? So yeah, I mean, I think on reflection, where we're at now is been an interesting journey. And hopefully, if we stay true to the values that a lot of the partners and organisations have said are really important, we're actually going to make some progress. And I don't think I can sort of add too much more now to the conversation, because anything else that we have got in the pipeline or is looking to emerge would almost be preempting where we're going to end up. So hopefully that has been sort of useful in many ways, but trying to integrate as much as possible with internal colleagues and other partners, with the community at the centre of it, is definitely something that is strong. There's a real willingness to try and see that approach be taken forward as something that is just what we do. So yeah, hopefully that's a useful sort of few things to share with you.
Well, that's really helpful, Rob. I think what I see as an outsider in terms of the High Peak example work there is, whilst this is a funding opportunity that's come along, and it's the timescales, kind of mean you can't collaborate properly. What has happened in High Peak is that collaboration, that shared purpose between local authority, voluntary sector, different tiers of local authority that's been building, and perhaps COVID accelerated that shared working together. So I think it does put you in a better position, maybe going forward, to think about those opportunities.
Just interesting point coming out of it all is the conversation around how our leisure assets and parks and open spaces might be managed in the future. And I think it's interesting because the starting point for that conversation has been about outcomes first. It hasn't been about the bottom line. So it hasn't been about, right, what do we pay on a contract management fee to our leisure operator now, and we've got to make sure that it's there or thereabouts, or it's coming in cheaper. It's about, right, what are the shared outcomes that we want to try and achieve, and then how could we do it differently? And actually the cost is the cost. And obviously we're not at the point yet where we know how all of that is looking absolutely clearly, but the principles are true to the outcomes being first rather than the financial bottom line being first, which I think is a really refreshing way to look at it. Very much more in line with what Martin's saying around the Marmot theory and how you look to actually address inequality rather than look at the council sort of prioritising what it needs to do at the start. I appreciate it may not work through as is exactly the way we think it might, but I think it's a great way to take an outlook to start with first.
Okay, great, thanks, Rob. I just want to touch on a couple of other opportunities that are actually mentioned in the Levelling Up paper. In a moment, I'll ask Sarah Clark just to look at it from the perspective of Street Games. So Street Games, one of Sport England's system partners around working on delivering their new strategy and have a great presence across our footprint. So in a second, Sarah can maybe just give a perspective from Street Games. I was just going to talk about football funding, and actually in the Levelling Up paper, the money that comes from the Premier League and Sport England into the Football Foundation is specifically mentioned in terms of football being a vehicle for levelling up, and how that will look in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire seems to be very much through something called Play Zone, which are essentially multi-use games areas on acid, I think would be how I would describe it, in the very kind of wow facilities suitable for lots of different games as well as football. And they're going to be delivered firstly hopefully through the two cities, and then the opportunity for districts and boroughs to move forward. But what is really interesting is the Football Foundation approach has been that they don't want just the facilities to be built and put there in the park. They want authentic community engagement to be involved in deciding where those facilities, whether they'll happen and where they will be. So we've had some work through Football in Derby, which has enabled this to move forward. And in one particular area of Derby, it's very much the football isn't part of the culture. So it's how do we develop an interest in physical activity, not necessarily through football, although that's where the funding will come from. It's through cricket and it's through other sports. And that approach has been encouraged by Football Foundation. So they want authentic community engagement, and they also want a multi-sport community sport approach, so that other sports will be involved, which could be anything from Tai Chi happening on facilities, basis for walking, but how they fit spatially. They might be in the middle of a park or on a school site, but how does the community then make its way to those facilities? So that initial program will be in the cities, but then will then be delivered in the top two levelling up areas. So the districts and boroughs that are in priority areas 1 and 2, which is, I think, all but 2 authorities in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire will be able to be part of that programme, and it will link back to the review of the local football facility plans. So a real opportunity there to approach new audiences, do proper community engagement, but not just base it around football, base it around other things. And that's a really refreshing approach from Football Foundation. Sarah, would that be a good time for you to just talk about, from Levelling Up point of view, young people come through really importantly in the paper?
Yeah, hi Stuart. It will have to be a quick one for me, I'm afraid. I've got to shoot somewhere else in a minute. But I think what we're sort of finding and sort of talking to our network and the organisations within it is that this facilities are key for them, particularly obviously during the winter months, and ensuring that those facilities are local to those young people and are as accessible and welcoming to sort of young people and families as possible. and a lot of the organisations that we work with, you know, find it really difficult to access facilities that the young people and the communities that they're in want to carry out physical activity in. So facilities are absolutely key, certainly within our network, to ensuring that communities, underserved communities, can access sport and physical activity. But the other big thing is sort of staffing and volunteering, and sort of ensuring that the right staff and volunteers are around and in those communities to engage and work and develop them. And that is a really major hurdle at the moment for a lot of the organisations that we work with.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I know that in the Levelling Up Fund, I think it's the Youth Investment Fund that's mentioned, which is a massive hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds that's in there. I believe that there's a process going out to find a national partner to help distribute that funding, but the significant element is there for that capital building, so creating spaces where young people can be active and meet, etc. And you know, is it coming back to the old youth club, or is it something new and, you know, joined up in the way that Chris was talking about North East Derbyshire and that facility there? And then there's also a big revenue programme that will come out that seems to be an opportunity to develop the skills and the engagement with young people. And I think as soon as we know more on that, we'll look at the opportunities that there are for Derbyshire as part of that. I think that's probably touched on some of the levelling up items, the opportunities for ourselves. Rachel mentioned about the combined authority proposal for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, and I'll just outline what that is so that people kind of are all on the same point, and then maybe we can talk about some of the opportunities that might arise from that, and then hopefully that will feed nicely into just finishing off, and it would be good to get Martin's view at the end as to what he would do at this point with levelling up, which I think I know the answer, but in the context of where we are, you know, what is the opportunity that we have with levelling up? But in terms of the combined authority proposal for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, the government offered an incentive that if you have an elected mayor and a combined authority, you receive significantly more funding and more powers than the current position. So the two cities, Nottingham City, Derby City, Derbyshire County Council and Nottinghamshire County Council have come together and have come to the agreement that they would like to put in a bid for a combined authority for, I suppose it can't really be called the East Midlands because it doesn't include Leicester and Lincolnshire and Northants, but it is along that footprint that is currently there from an investment point of view, the LEP. So that proposal's gone in and it's being considered by government now. But in effect, there will be an elected mayor who will have a responsibility for certain functions such as climate change, investment, I believe, transport and highways and infrastructure. And anyone else, please add to this. Rachel, add any in if I've missed any. But they'll have that responsibility for that area. I think they will also potentially have the responsibility of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So how that might work with two separate constabularies with one person above, I think is yet to be thought through. But you can see that position and the office of the mayor becomes really important and has control and over a vast budget and the direction of our entire area. So if the proposal moves forward, then that combined authority would start in April 2024 with, I think, the election of that mayor. Now, some of the things that arise from that is, you know, if you have a mayor that comes from one particular, might be from, you know, someone who's known in Nottingham City or in Derbyshire County, you know, is there kind of bias towards the funding that goes into that particular area. But I think when the mayor comes into place, straight away they'll be thinking about how do I get re-elected. And as the population distribution is very even across the counties and the cities, you know, I think that points to the fact that there will be consideration given to the whole of that footprint, and that's, you know, that's really important. So that's the proposal. And that's Rachel. Have I got that right?
Sorry. Yeah, largely. I mean, I think, again, back to the what's pragmatic and what we might like to do if we had choices about some of these things. The Home Office are quite clear that they won't agree to combine the Police and Crime Commission without a combined work police force. So for our area, that's a no-no. We haven't got a combined police force. It's not going to happen. So that won't be included. The local enterprise partnership probably will be included within the footprint of the combined authority. And at this stage, I mean, the danger is that we see it as another tier, another complication, another set of, you know, issues. It may very well be that it is the only way we're going to get money and funding and flexibility down from government. So you have to give up some of that stuff to get some of that money. The big challenge for us will be in the area is making sure it works by involving everybody, because if the outcomes are really important, which they should be, then we need to engage with all districts and the boroughs as part of the decision about how we use that funding, that revenue funding for outcomes. And I have been in quite a few of the conversations with the leaders, and I guess everyone wants to try and do that. I think our partnership working in this area is not as good as it could be, and we could do more. This might galvanise some of our partnership. We don't get some of those risks coming forward, but yeah.
Right. Thanks, Rachel, and thank you for helping me along with my understanding of police and crime commissioners. That will stop me going into a different forum and getting it completely wrong. So thank you very much on that. Ilana, you've just put your hand up for a question.
Yeah, sorry, this is a question back to you, Stuart. I was just wondering, just on the back of that, just interested in your perspective on what you see as the opportunity kind of for physical activity and addressing inequalities, where we can contribute to the combined authority agenda going forwards.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I think there's, you know, because we will share a footprint with that combined authority, then it places an opportunity on the Active Partners Trust to engage, and I think we can use that to start to influence those politicians who will be involved in that combined authority to thinking about whole system approaches, so operating outside of traditional silos, but also about kind of working together and getting a real understanding of people at community level. And the irony is the government are passing down responsibilities for local decisions, but they're creating another level of local government as such that's above the current one. So there's a challenge there. But I think there's the big opportunities around urban regeneration. So what we were talking about right at the start. And one of those is creating more walkable communities. So can we get the transport and highways system to be thinking of putting walking at the pinnacle of the transport system? So walking becomes more important in thinking and policy than cycling, and more important than cars. I think the new highway code kind of pointed towards that a bit. And how we can energise that system. And if we have time, Joe Bookman, who's the Walk Derbyshire lead for Walk Derbyshire, might want to contribute. But we've got system approaches to walking happening now in Nottingham City, the Nottinghamshire County Council, in Derbyshire, and hopefully in coming up in the city. So walking becomes really important. And it's the importance of public transport in that. So we know that more people walk in Nottingham City than Derby City, and we think partly that could be down to the tram system because it gets people walking to the trams. Now, if Nottingham and Derby are being thought of as one transport system, does that enable the tram system to go into Derby? I think there's actually a tender out for the moment for an e-bike scheme across the two cities. So there is a bit of thinking that's coming through in our agenda. So I think by getting active travel and walking environment embedded within the two counties and the two cities, that can start to have an impact around inequality. I think the big key is how will the ICS, the integrated care systems and partnerships, work with the new combined authority? Because I still see that there's always two conversations that happen. One is the health and adult care conversation and the future of that. And then on the other side, separate, even within county councils where it's supposedly the same council, a separate conversation that's around regeneration, jobs and transport and housing. So how can that combined authority actually encourage that joined up working where we can really make some changes to the lives of people who are in our most deprived communities? So I think that's where I'm thinking at the moment, Alana, and how can we really, with the voices of Rachel, for example, and Derek, who we videoed the discussion with, how can we work with those people to have an influence? Do you have any things to add as from an HBT perspective that I've missed?
No, sorry, I put my hands down. No, that's a good summary. Just thinking, like Rachel says in the chat, it's been quite frantic, and it feels like it's moving at quite a fast pace. So just being ready to get to work with it really and get capitalize on the opportunity. Right.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've just got a couple of minutes left, which I invite you back into the conversation, Martin. I think, I'd summarise by I think there are a lot of opportunities for us, particularly around that urban environment, using things like football, youth investment funds to do it. But the political situation nationally we're facing is up in the air. Tax cuts seems to be the thing that comes out from the prospective candidates for the Tory leadership, as opposed to maybe the odd comment about levelling up. And from where we are now, what's the thinking that you might have, or you're starting to hear, for taking forward the opportunity that all this provides us?
It's been interesting listening to the debate, and I do acknowledge what Rachel said right at the beginning. I've probably been in the game too long, and I'm seeing things come round, and I'm not trying to dismiss the energy that people got, and I don't blame anybody jumping on an opportunity for funding. Things out there at the moment are so bloody desperate that the opportunity to try to get access to funding, yes, you've got to go for it and you've got to make it. But I remain just as cynical about the whole sort of levelling up thing, just listening to what people say. And you're right, Stuart, I'm not convinced what we will be left with after the Tory choose a new MP, or what we're going to face if there's even an election and a change of government. There are elements in this I could see the Labour Party keeping, but there are things that maybe they wouldn't. So I'm just as cynical about that. Where would I go? I think I would stick with where I've always been. We have to look at ourselves first. Until we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, we are using the resources and the assets we have in our control and our power, and we are doing everything we can possibly do to address inequality in activity and contribute to those health inequalities. And we are making a real difference to the lives of the people who at the moment are suffering with ill health, dying early and everything else. And when we get that right first, then I think we can seriously start thinking about other opportunities. But that it's all in that NAO report. 10 years God knows how many billions of funding went in through government and Sport England, and we made hardly a dot of difference on the thing we were supposed to be doing. Let's put that right first before we start looking elsewhere.
Right. Thank you. I absolutely agree. I think, you know, we can't start over again, which I think when asked that question somewhere else, Martin, you said I'd scrap it all and start all over again. We're not in that situation. So I think
tempting now, isn't it, Stuart?
We've got some, you know, really good work to build on, where we're seeing the readiness in some areas for that real collaborative approach and to work with communities and listen to communities. So services and things that are happening are personalised. It's actually what people want. Also, that we're trying to develop a culture of learning. So we're exchanging all the examples that we're getting, and certainly from an Active Derbyshire, Active Notts point of view, we're investing heavily in evaluation going forward, so that we can capture what works, what doesn't work, and disseminate the learning around that. And we'll take it forward then and use whatever opportunities we can. So on that, we've just slightly gone over. I'd just like thank you very much, Martin, for coming along and contributing. Rachel, thanks very much for dropping in and contributing to the discussion and helping me out with understanding combined authorities. And thanks to Chris and Rob and Sarah for contributing as well. That was really, really helpful. We will be having a talking space again starting in September. But if people think there are issues that are coming up, we can always do a talking space extra. You know, some people are asking for one around the cost of living crisis, and you know, we're seeing the implications of that. Then please put in the chat what you think might be worth discussing. Please put your comments in about whether today was useful. And if it's not useful for you, then please add that in as well, because that's part of our learning. But take care for the rest of the day. Get in the shade, drink lots and lots of water, and hopefully the last hour has been informative, and we can take this conversation on in the future. Thank you very much.